This session is session 5, and it deals with an introduction. We're going to do an introduction to the book of Obadiah. Well, Obadiah has the distinction of being the shortest book in the Old Testament. It has only 21 verses, and basically, if we were to make an assessment of the book, we would say that it is the book that is both the book and Obadiah the prophet is in regards to the reaction to the invasion of Jerusalem. So Obadiah, the book, is concerned about Obadiah's and the reaction to the invasion of Jerusalem. To begin with, we can the name Obadiah means servant of Jehovah, or we could say worshiper of Jehovah. That's what his name means. However, if we're going to capture the essence of the book and the essence of what the Obadiah is about, we would say that he is a censorer. He's a censorer of ridicule, because the book is going to be focused on Edom, and Obadiah is going to be actually censoring the ridicule that the nation of Edom has played and has given to Israel. Now, if we were to look at the theme of the book, we would say that the theme is about the condemnation of Edom for the part that she played in Israel's plunder. So largely, Obadiah is concerned about condemning the Edomites for what they have done and were doing to Israel. Now, the book is important because in it, what we're going to find, we're going to see a sort of somewhat detailed breakdown of Edom. And let me begin, before I even look at the issues in the book. Let's look at who Obadiah was. Now, what's interesting is that there are several Obadiahs in the Old Testament, and then we are forced to ask which one of these Obadiahs is this prophet that we're reading about. So let me ask us to turn to 1 Kings chapter 18, where we are going to meet our first Obadiah in 1 Kings chapter 18, and the verse is number 3. So we have in chapter 18 and verse 3 of 1 Kings this. So, and Ahab called Obadiah, who was over the household. Now, Obadiah heard the Lord greatly. So we have an Obadiah who was an officer in the house of Ahab. When we go to 1 Chronicles chapter 17 and verse 7, we have a prince who taught the law in Judah, and he was Obadiah. Or in other words, So Obadiah was not only an officer. The name Obadiah is not only in regards to the house of Ahab, the officer in the house of Ahab, but he was also the name is associated with the prince who taught the law to Judah, and that we find in First Chronicles chapter 17 and verse 7. When we get to Second Chronicles chapter 34 and verse number 12, we see an Obadiah who is an overseer in the repairing of the temple. So when the temple was being repaired, there was an Obadiah who was in fact a foreman, if you want to call him that. Now, in Nehemiah chapter 10 and verse 5, we have Obadiah being the priest in the time of Nehemiah. So there are at least 5 references to Obadiah in the Old Testament. Now, we ask the question, which of these Obadiah was he? And so we can find or estimate which it is by looking at the date of the book and looking at when his name appears. Okay? Now, if we look at the character of Obadiah, we're going to see that, first of all, Obadiah was sensitive. He was very sensitive to the hurt that Edom caused Israel, Judah. All right? Now, I want you to notice, and I think we had made this point in a previous class when we looked at the nations concerned with the prophets, the minor prophets. We said that basically they're siblings, if you want to call it that. They're cousins. All right? But Edom has always, or Esau, from whom the Edomites descended, they lacked brotherly love. And that was manifested by the Edomites. All right? So Obadiah was very concerned about that. Now, throughout the time of their relationship, Obadiah was fearless. He was not only hurt by the relationship that these two cousins had, as manifested by Edom, but he was fearless enough to do this, what? To condemn and to denounce the neighbors who at different times held and lived in the territory close to Judah. Now, when we looked last week at the nations of Israel, the Gentile nations that surrounded Israel, Judah, we see that Edom has always had a difficulty, a problem with Israel, with Judah. In fact, when they were going across the promise, going to the promised land, the Edomites decided to block them and to cause trouble for them during that journey. Now, one of the things that Obadiah kept on preaching about and saying in all of this is that the kingdom shall be Jehovah's, or the kingdom shall belong to Jehovah. Now, it is important as we look at the prophet, the kind of person that he was, it is also important that we look at the land of Edom. And I want us to look at that in some detail now. What was Edom like in terms of its geography. I don't know if this is a correct word in the study of geography and science of geography, but even the topography, the way that the land itself that was inhabited by the Edomites is important, and it would play an important part in Obadiah's time. Now, first of all, what we know about the land of Edom is that it was very mountainous. It was a mountainous area, and the land itself was very rugged. The landmass. So Edom is mountainous, it is rugged, and the landmass was about 100 miles long, and it extended from the river Arnon, and this river was south of the border of Moab. The land of Edom stretched far, well, to the south. It stretched to the Gulf of Aqaba, and I hope I'm pronouncing it right, Aqabah. Now, this aspect, or this part of the land, included certain features. One, it included the mountains, but they also had a very fruitful, fertile land, or in the valley, or the plateau, if we want to call it that. So there's a mountain and the valley. The valley was very fertile, very fertile, fruitful. I'm mixing up my words. Both to the east and to the west of Arabah, Arabah. Now, that aspect of part of the land, they had, or there was a great depression in the land, and it was connected to the Dead Sea with the Gulf of Aqaba, Aqaba. So what you had is that the land, mountainous on the one hand, fertile on the ground, in the valley, in the vale, if you want to call it that. Then the land stretched across to the Dead Sea, to the Gulf of Aqaba, and that sort of merged with the land and with the Dead Sea. Now, the highest point, and this is important if we're going to understand what Obadiah was saying, the highest point of the land was Mount Seir, Seir, Mount Seir, and that height rose to some 3,500 feet above sea level and above the land of Arabah, Arabah, as I've been spelling it. Now, during the days of the monarchy, that is the kings, David, Solomon, Saul, during that time, during the days of the monarchy, the capital of Edom was Selah, Sela. And where was that located? It was located south. Let me get my notes here. It was south, the southern end of the valley. So here is what, if we want to picture it, I should have had a map, but here's what we know about Edom. The mountains, because it was a mountainous and a rugged area, it protected the people in the valley. All right? The inhabitants in the valley, they were protected by the two mountains. The the Dead Sea and the Gulf of Araba. They helped to merge. So in a sense, the land of Edom was very, in terms of its physical properties, in terms of its topography, in terms of its geography, it was very well fortified. It was, we could say that it was a natural fortress. Nature provided them that fortress with the mountains, with the sea, and they felt very protected. Now, the country all along Edom, what you had, because it was a mountainous area, there was a rocky ridge, mountain ridge. Now, this mountain ridge stood at the center of Mount Hor, H-O-R. And here is where Aaron died, and this is where Aaron was buried. Now, what do we have? And the point I'm making here is that the Edomites felt very secure because of their natural location. Okay? Now, when Aaron died, that's where he was buried. Okay? Now, in the district Esau, that is in that valley aspect, Esau settled. That's where Esau settled. And hence, the Edomites. So Esau settled there just about or after the time that he fled from Jacob, where he fled from Jacob in Padam Aram. Okay, so this is a very significant place. So Aaron is buried there, and when Esau fled from Jacob and went to Padam Aram, this is where he was. Now, the Edomites, which were descendants of Esau, as I've been saying, they inhabited that land, and that's where they were called Edomites. Now, what biblical history tells us is that at the fall of Jerusalem in 586 BC, the Edomites were a strong people, very strong, and they had the protection, as I've been saying. I don't want to repeat myself unnecessarily here. They had the nature, as I said, blessed them with that fortress. But also, what was important here is that they became a natural stronghold. All right? They became that strong stronghold of, okay, put it this way. They were a very fortified city, a very fortified country. And that worked to their advantage. So when Obadiah is prophesying to Edom and about Edom, we have to understand the what is being said about that nation Edom. Let me show you something. If we look at Obadiah if we look at chapter 1, all right, and notice what how Obadiah starts his vision. If you look at Obadiah chapter 1. It has only one chapter anyway. Verse 1. Thus says the Lord God concerning Edom. We have heard a report from the Lord, and a messenger has been sent among the nations. Watch this. Behold, now rise up, let us rise against her for battle. Behold, I will make, and listen to what Obadiah is saying. Behold, I will make you small among the nations, and you shall be utterly despised. The pride of your heart has deceived you. You who live in the clefts of the rock, in your lofty dwelling, who say in your heart, who will bring me down to the ground? Though you soar aloft like the eagle, though your nest is among the stars, from there I will bring you down, declares the Lord. When we come to look at a deeper depth of the verses, what Obadiah is doing here is suggesting that the Edomites rested in the fact of where they were naturally. They became boastful. They thought that they were invincible because they lived in the cleft of the mountains. And notice, in a sort of sarcastic way, cynical way, if you wish, Obadiah is saying, yes, you make your nest among the stars and you soar like the eagles because of your high mountains and all of that. But you have become so proud that you have caught the attention of the Almighty God, not only because of your pride, but also because of the way you are treating and have treated your brother. What's the consequence? What's the end result? I will bring you down. In other words, you are going to be humbled. And it becomes necessary because it's necessary because of the kind of people you have become. So now, as we said, the theme of the book is one of condemnation for their part in the plunder. Now let us look at the date for the book as we look at the introduction to the book of Obadiah before we get into an exegesis of the verses. The date of the book is, there's some difficulty or some disagreement regarding the history of the book, the date of the book. There is one view that says there are two dates that are suggested for the writing of the book. The first is that it was written sometime about 587 BC. There are those who hold that it was written sometime around 845 BC. So there are two possible dates that have been suggested. One, 587 BC, and the other, 845 BC. Those are the two dates that are suggested for the book. Now, let's look at the evidence that has been given for the 845 BC date. Well, first of all, what we know around this time is that Jerusalem had or experienced several invasions. First of all, in 926 BC, there was the invasion by Shishak of Egypt, and in terms of spelling, Shishak. Shishak of Egypt invaded Jerusalem. That was about 926 BC. And we can read about that in 1 Kings chapter 14, verse 25 and 26. But here is the point. Edom was subject to the Hebrews at that time. So Edom was subject to the Hebrews at that time. All right? And we have that evidence that will come later. I'll give you the date later. The next one is that the Philistines and the Arabs invaded Jerusalem in 848, during 848 to 844 BC. And that is recorded in 2 Chronicles 21 and verse 16. During the time of Joram's reign, Jehoash invaded it, that is Jerusalem, in the days of Amaziah, A-M-A-Z-I-A-H, and that was sometime 780 BC. Now, what we know is that those invaders were called strangers, according to 2 Chronicles 21 and verse 11. And also Nebuchadnezzar destroyed it in 586 BC. What's my point? Using these dates, there is the suggestion that the book would have been written about 845 BC. Now, the two invasions which we would consider are the ones in 845 BC and the one in 587 BC. And either date, it doesn't, it's not going to, okay, how do I put it this way? It's not a salvation issue, as I always say. It is, there's evidence on both sides. So the prophets referred to Nebuchadnezzar's invasion and Babylon, the Chaldeans, and even Nebuchadnezzar by name is mentioned, but the name of Obadiah is not during that time of the invasion. So here is something else. In describing the invasion, Obadiah does not mention certain things. Number one, he does not mention the raising of the walls, he does not mention the burning down of the palace, which took place during that time. He doesn't mention the burning of the temple. The deportation of the king is not mentioned. And he doesn't mention the movement of the entire nation. So these things are not mentioned in 580 BC. sorry, they are mentioned in 580 BC, 586 BC, and we see that in 1 Kings 25. And therefore, those who argue for the date of 845 BC says that that's where they couch the evidence. Now, Jeremiah writes before 586 BC, and the two books contain materials that are common. That is Obadiah and Jeremiah 49, 7 to 22. All right? So those who believe this invasion to be by the the Philistines rather, and Arabs in 848 to 844 BC, accept the date that the book was written in 845 BC. All right, so that's in the dating of the book. I hope I'm not confusing you at all. But based on the evidences that we have there, the idea is that the book they're accepting, and as I said, it doesn't really matter for me personally, 845 BC. So factual evidence, yes, but it does not destroy the quality of the book or the truthfulness or the authenticity of the book. So we know about the man Obadiah. We know about the land Obadiah, the land Edom. We know about the kind of person that Obadiah was, and we know what Obadiah was going against. Now, Obadiah, as I said, is preaching a condemnation of the nation of Edom because of what they did to their brother. Now, here is something that we need to look at in terms of the quality of the book, or the tone of the book, if we want to call it that, or the form of the book. One of the things that we're going to see as we look through the verses, as we study the book verse by verse, is that Obadiah that is the book now, could be considered to be a national oracle. It is about a national oracle. What do I mean by that? What's an oracle? An oracle, in this sense, is a vision of revelation signifying a divine communication. So what Obadiah is doing is, through this vision or through this revelation, he is suggesting, he is teaching, he's demonstrating that there is a divine communication. In other words, what Obadiah is talking about is not about himself. It is the message that he has got from God. So if you look at, again, chapter 1 and verse 1, thus says the Lord God concerning Edom, we have heard a report from the Lord. So what Obadiah is saying is not something about himself. He's not talking on his own behalf. He is, in fact, documented through this vision, through this revelation called the oracles, or what the oracles are. Now, if we look at the idea of an oracle, or of this vision, it is a technical term, oracle, a technical term, and it is associated with a visible conveying of a message. And in fact, this was peculiar to the pre-exilic prophecies. They would give woes, as in Amos. They would give oracles. All right? So in this context, in the context of Obadiah, what Obadiah is doing is giving an impending judgment, teaching, telling, prophesying about an impending judgment. And he's doing this through this vision. And the word for vision here is Chazon. My pronunciation, I'm always conscious of. It is Chazon, meaning a vision. It means vision. It's visual. It's an audio-visual revelation. So the word vision, oracle, it signifies that there is a divine revelation from God. So remember when we looked at who the prophets were and their roles, we said that they were not speaking of themselves. They were speaking about and from. They were speaking from God. They were God's mouthpiece. They were God's messengers. And Obadiah is just that kind of person, giving condemnation to the Edomites, and he is doing that directly from God. So, what are we going to be saying about the book of Obadiah now in terms of looking at it before we look at a sort of brief outline of the book? We're going to take the date to be 845 BC. That's the date of the book. 845 BC. We're going to take that date as being the date that it was written. Secondly, the message of the book of Obadiah is going to be because it's the fall of Edom because of cruelty. It is because it's the fall of Edom because they were lacking in brotherly love and the way they were treating Israel and Judah. Israel. All right. Now, what's the lesson of that we're going to get from the book? Look at verse 11 of the book. All right, verse 11 says, on the day that you stood aloof, on the day that strangers carried off his wealth, and foreigners entered his gates, and cast lots for Jerusalem, you were like one of them. What's the condemnation here? The Edomites stood by indifferently and allowed Israel to be plundered. They did not come to the rescue of Israel when they could have. And God is going, because I don't want to go over again what we discussed when we were looking at the nation of Edom. We know that from the very beginning, the rift between Jacob and Esau, it extended even to this point. And now God is going to call them into account because they stood by and would not help to alleviate the sufferings of their family member, the descendants of Jacob. All right. The other thing that we want to suggest in terms of, let us see if we can look at, as we go in, look at the outline of the book, a brief outline of the book. And there is a detailed outline that we can give you, but I'm just going to give you for now, at least I'm going to give you two sets of outlines that we can use for the book, and that it will help you as you study the book. In fact, I normally do not give member verses, and I keep saying that I know the value of the member verses and all of that. But I'm going to give you these verses that I think it would be good for you to memorize. But it's not going to be used as an assessment at all. All right. And it is Obadiah. I keep saying chapter 1. It only has only one chapter. Obadiah 1 and verse 3, verse 4, and verse 11. And let me just read them for you. Obadiah chapter 3, verse 3 and 4. It says, "The pride of your heart has deceived you." And I'm reading from the ESV. The pride of your heart has deceived you. You who live in clefts of the rock, in your lofty dwellings, who cry in your heart, "Who will bring me down to the ground?" Though you soar aloft like the eagle, though your nest is set among the stars, though from there I will bring you down, declares the Lord. And we just read verse 11, which I'll read again. "On the day that you stood aloof, on the day that the strangers carried off his wealth, and foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, you were like one of them." All right. And when we come to look in greater detail at the book, we're going to make some spiritual applications about how involved we are in the work of the Lord, whereas some other persons would just stand by and just look. And what responsibilities that we have. Possible outlines that we can look at the book, which would, I hope, would make it easier for you as you study the book. So first of all, we can divide the book into 3, and I'd used this term before, pericopes. 3, the first, we have from verses 1 to 9, the ruin of Edom, despite her being strong and securely sheltered in the Rocky Mountains. So verses 1 to 9 talks about how they had placed their trust in their geographical location. And we have that in verses 1 to 9. Then when we look at the second grouping of words, of verses, chapter 10, verse 14 through to verses 10 to 14, we have the reasons for it. Why are they being condemned? In verses 10 to 14, for 2 reasons. Number 1, their cruelty to Jacob, and their rejoicing over Judah's adversity. And the final verses 15 to 21, retribution of Edom and restoration of Israel. So that is one outline that we could look at. Another outline that we could look at as we study the book of Obadiah is the utter destruction of Edom is decreed. And that is verses 2 to 16. But we can break down verses 2 to 16 into these sections. 1, announcement of the judgment. That's verses 2 to 9. Secondly, the causes of the judgment in verses 10 to 14. And thirdly, the terrors of the day of Jehovah in verses 15 and 16. The second section of the book talks about the exaltation of Israel, and that is from verses 17 to 21. And it can be divided into 1, restoration of a remnant, verse 17. Verses 18 to 20, conquest of Edom and surrounding nations. And verse 21, Jehovah's universal sway, his universal sovereignty. So looking at the book from two aspects, we can say it has three sections, or we can say that it has two broad sections broken down into these. So in the next class that we have, we are now going, having looked at who the name of Obadiah, looked at the fact that there are several Obadiahs in the Old Testament, looking at the land, how fortified they were, and because of that fortification, they became proud, arrogant, thinking that they were impenetrable, invincible. The fact that they were arch enemies of Judah, of Israel, because that the rift that started all the way back from Genesis. Then we looked at the outline for the book, and when we come to the next class, what we will do is now go through verse by verse. It's only 21 verses, so we will take up that class and go through the verses and see what we can learn from that class. And again, we ask that you listen to this and keep in mind the verses that I want you to commit to memory, but it is not going to be used for any assessment. Okay? All right. Thank you very much.